Welcome back to another discussion here on the Roll Toddy Draft Blog. And now that's finally the NFL offseason and the college football offseason, we have released our first Roll Toddy 2015 Big Board, listing out our top 32 prospects for this year's draft. And Herbie, it couldn't be a more exciting time of year without the fact that, football is technically over.
It technically ends, but, I feel like sometimes you and I talk more in the off season than we do in the regular season. It's what we like. I mean, we enjoy this time of year, excited to get into it.
Everything's so much more up in the air. There are no final results until draft day, and even then there's still more to talk about. But we're going to do a little discussion here about Herbie and I's big board. And really one of the big ones that we're putting up is why isn't the quarterbacks, the much-discussed quarterback debate between Marcus Mariota of Oregon, Jameis Winston of Florida State, among others, and some other big quarterback names out there, why aren't they on top of our big board? So, Herbie, let's start with your reasoning. Why is Jameis Winston or Marcus Mariota not on top of your big board?
Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota are two guys that there's no doubt I think they're going in the first round. Jameis frightens me. I think it was Mel who said today that each month that he doesn't get in trouble, he's just gonna increase his stock. And I want to put him in that first spot, but I have different things in mind. And Marcus, I think he's just got to prove himself. I think he's got to get to the combine, and he's got to show that he can make the NFL throws, and that he can check down, and he can go through his progressions and be a pro-style quarterback. But I couldn't put him in my first two. I've got a lot of defensive linemen first, but I've got Jameis at 4, and I've got Marcus at 8.
There's no doubt that Marcus and Jameis Winston are going to go in the first round. I personally, a little sneak peek into what will be our first mock draft being released very, very soon, is that I think Jameis Winston will go number 1 overall to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That does not make him the top prospect in this draft, and I think that there's a very big difference between having the top pick and picking for need and being the top prospect in the draft. To me, Leonard Williams, you can just define him as a defensive lineman because he can play any position along the line, is the top prospect in the draft. He's the most versatile. He's the most overall NFL-ready player to make a huge impact for his team, whether it's Tampa Bay, Tennessee, Jacksonville, no matter who ends up taking him. I think he will have the quickest and most effective impact in the NFL right off the bat. That's not to say that Jameis, Amari Cooper, Shane Ray, Randy Gregory won't do the same.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about it, but this draft class is not as good as it was last year. A lot of this draft is going to be based on need, and while we don't have Jameis number 1 in our mocks, we have him going number 1 in the draft to Tampa Bay. That's a need-based pick. You can't pass up on talent like that, especially if you're Tampa Bay. Mike Glennon just doesn't look like the answer yet. So, I think that it's going to be a more interesting draft. There's going to be different talents and different levels of talent, but not coming up to what we had last year. Compared to the 2014 draft class last year. So we'll see a different type of draft strategy this year.
I think that really there's a lot more players in this draft that have question marks, which is the bigger deal. Not necessarily that's not a talented draft class or it's not as deep, but just more guys with question marks. Jameis Winston, as you mentioned, off the field issues, but he comes out of that great Jimbo Fisher pro-style offense that he helped him win a Heisman Trophy, and he ran to almost perfection despite how you might feel about a season this year. Marcus Mariota is the high-character kid who's barely throws an interception, doesn't fumble the football, has everything that you want, intangible and off the field wise, but comes from that Oregon offense that doesn't always translate to the NFL. And inside and outside of that, even the offensive linemen, we were kind of talking about this before we came on air. The offensive linemen in this group, there are a lot of question marks in there too. There doesn't seem to be that kind of Jake Long or just the automatic, top 3 pick, the Luke Jokels of the world, who is going to go number 1 overall or, even really in the top 3. So I think that it's a D-line dominant draft, especially on the top end. But still, there are just some shaky question marks that, we've seen guys like this before who've come out but haven't done that well. So I think that that's really the biggest issue with this draft is the question marks.
I think it's funny how we've seen a trend. I feel like the past couple of years we see We've seen big offensive linemen, big offensive power. It's been very offensive the past couple years, and I think now, I mean, it feels like a top-heavy defensive class. I don't think our top 5 on the big board is the same at all. I think we're all out of order, and that's just the way I see it right now. But I think you're right. A lot of this class is going to come down to the combine, and what we're going to see how these guys can move. We've seen how they play, but I want to see them test.
Absolutely. The athletic test for a lot of these guys is going to be a big deal. You look at guys like Shane Ray and Randy Gregory, who are highly considered the 2 top pass rushers. Williams is obviously the top D lineman, but they seem to be the top pure pass rushers in this draft. Shane Ray, very explosive, very violent hand motions, great at keeping blockers off him despite a smaller frame, and it was one of the top sack leaders in the nation this year. While Randy Gregory only had 6 to 7 sacks, but is the 6'6" long explosive athlete that people just fall in love with. And you wonder how the combine and the workouts will affect them. Even though on the game tape you might say that Shane Ray has the obvious advantage. Personally, I think Shane Ray has the advantage, but NFL GMs might see it differently just because of the length and that dangerous and ever dangerous word that is potential that Gregory has.
Yeah, and you have Leonard Williams, correct? You're number 1 on your big board.
Sure.
So I have Randy Gregory as my number 1. I just think that a pass rushing talent like him is tough to pass up on, and I really like his body size and ability. I mean, he's just one of these freaks of nature in this draft. I mean, you've got Vic Beasley in this draft who's gonna happen maybe past pick 20, but these long body guys, I don't think you can pass up on them in this draft just because there's always a need for pass rushers.
Absolutely. Just like you can never have too many cornerbacks, you can never have too many pass rushers. Speaking of cornerbacks, it's interesting. I think you'll see that if you take a look at both of our big boards, there is kind of a lack of defensive back talent in this draft, or at least on the top end. The spectacular Oregon cornerback, F.K. Ifeolumu, hurt himself, tore his ACL right before the national title game, the national semifinal. And he's fallen from being a surefire, top 10 to 15 draft pick to maybe a 2nd or 3rd rounder. You have Trey Wayne from Michigan State, who will probably be a successful cornerback, but isn't the overall elite talent you like at corner. And at the top of them all, you have Landon Collins, the safety from Alabama, who I think will be an absolute stud. Bias put aside, he's just a great football player. And I really think that after that, it just really drops off. But you always seem to find cornerback talent late in drafts. Same with linebacker talent. That's why I think the linebacker position has been a little undervalued in the past few drafts. So we'll see how that kind of all shakes up because cornerbacks and especially some linebackers always, with their numbers at the combine, make a huge splash and seem to shoot up big boards.
Yeah, I think all my defensive backs, as of right now, are where they're going to be worth. So I think we both have Landon Collins at 6. I think he definitely goes in the first 10 picks. He's worth that talent. He's worth that early top 10 money just because he's such an incredible talent. And then you're right, these corners, I've got Trey Waynes at 19 and I've got Marcus Peters at 25. Marcus Peters obviously has some off-the-field issues. Trey Waynes, I think about Michigan State corners, how much I love them, how well they've been playing in the NFL, especially for the Denver Broncos this past season. I really do enjoy the way they play the defensive game of football. But I think you're right. Defensive backs, it's a tough pick this year in 2015.
And another kind of rundown that we've been going through is wide receivers. And while personally, once again, bias aside, I think we can both agree that Amari Cooper is the top receiver in the draft. This is once again a draft with a lot of good wide receiving talent. You have Devontae Parker out of Louisville, Kevin White out of West Virginia, and Jalen Strong out of Arizona State, not to mention Dorial Green-Beckham, who don't really know what school to put next to his name, but we'll stick with Oklahoma since he attended that university last season. A very deep crop of receivers. How do you see them shaking out in the first round, Herbie?
I think I gave Amari more love than you did on my big board, didn't I? I got him at 2.
You have him at 2?
I have him at 2.
2, I have him at 3. But,
okay. All right. So
apples to oranges, man.
So, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt Amari Cooper is a game-changing wide receiver. I think a lot of people have Amari Cooper going to the Oakland Raiders. I think that's the first team of need for a wide receiver. And, I mean, if there's anything that is going to make Derek Carr into a professional football player, it's throwing the ball to Amari Cooper and creating a young relationship there. So I think, I mean, picks don't get any more perfect. But then I think you're right. I've got Kevin White, I believe, is my next wide receiver at 17, and where I've got Devontae Parker at 26. You see Devontae Parker a little better than I do. I think a lot of Devontae Parker's success had to do with Teddy Bridgewater. So I'm not going to have him as high up as you do. And I think Mel had him going pretty early to the Cleveland Browns in his mock today. But Devontae Parker, I like his size, I like his ability, but I think he's definitely a first rounder. But I would not be shocked if he fell somewhere early second round.
For me, Parker, personally, he reminds me a lot of a little bit bigger Chad Johnson, Chad Ochocinco, whichever one you like to go with, just someone who I grew up with. Similar size, similar frame, similar skill set. He's a great deep threat. The reason I'm so high on Devontae Parker is because the first game he played all season after that foot injury was against Florida State the Thursday before Halloween. And he absolutely lit up the Seminoles. There was only one game. I believe he only played 6 games this season. Only one of those games did he not have over 100 yards receiving. So in 5 games, he had almost 1,000 receiving yards. That, to me, just speaks to what this kid can do athletically. Probably needs to. You're right. Teddy Bridgewater definitely helped his numbers this year, but you saw him come in once again in a short period of time and have a very effective and average over 20 yards a catch. The guy can obviously get downfield. I'm interested to see how he translates to playing a full NFL season, depending on what kind of quarterback he has to deal with. But it wouldn't shock me to see Minnesota try and grab Parker and try and team up former teammates between Bridgewater and Parker.
And I actually so I've got Kevin White at 17. I've got Dorial Green-Beckham at 19. At 20. I'm sorry. And I'm shocked I just passed over him. I loved him when he was at Mizzou, and I loved him coming out of high school. I love his ability, and I feel bad.
Season really blossomed after a disappointing freshman year, and you can't teach 6'6", 225.
No, absolutely not. And I think he's the kind of one of those guys that got caught up in the school hype, and some places didn't work out, other places didn't work out, and I think we didn't have a full opportunity to see his potential. But from what we did see after that freshman year, I think he's definitely worth a first-round pick for a team that needs it. I know that there's some talk of the Patriots being into a wide receiver, maybe the 49ers, depending on what happens to Michael Crabtree. So there's places for some receivers in the first round, but they're nothing like the talent in the class last year.
Yeah. Well, we certainly see this interesting to see how these two classes, both very deep classes of wide receivers, stack up against each other by the end of next season. But, Herbie, one more topic before we get finished with this discussion, running backs. Hasn't been a lot of love shown toward the running backs since Trent Richardson got taken number 3 overall by Cleveland. Last year, the last 2 seasons, I believe, we haven't seen a running back go in the first round. Todd Gurley's coming off an ACL tear. Melvin Gordon, despite having one of the better seasons that I can really think of from a running back, still you kind of have that Wisconsin running back moniker where a lot of these guys haven't had a lot of success in the NFL. How do you see this running back class shaking out, especially when it comes to the first round?
It's a tough running back year because, if Melvin Gordon, I have him right where I think he's gonna get picked. I have him at 22 on my big board, and I have Todd Gurley at 30. So I just snuck him in my top 30. Just because I had to. But the problem is, if Todd Gurley doesn't get injured, I think there's no doubt that he's a top 10 pick for a team that needs it. I think he was the guy that would have turned the leaf to Trent Richardson. There aren't going to be many Todd Gurleys. There are not going to be many Trent Richardsons. And, I think that Todd Gurley is one of those special guys that was gonna change the running back mantra. But, these guys like Amir Abdullah, I think it's a decent running back class. Not deep, though. I think you could potentially see Amir Abdullah go in the 3rd, but I expect him to go in the 2nd. And I think you could see Melvin Gordon potentially fall to the 2nd as well. And, it's all going to be about who's going to take a risk on Todd Gurley. Not many people on this earth are Adrian Peterson.
No, absolutely not. To me, with Todd Gurley, even with the ACL tear, I just can't help but put him ahead of Melvin Gordon. I just think that he was that much more impressive. And before the suspension and the injury, they did a great job of switching him up with Sonny Michel and with Nick Chubb. And obviously Nick Chubb is going to go on to have a great career at Georgia. But back to Gurley, just he was physically dominant at all times on Georgia. You know, since freshman year, he's been a dominant player in the SEC for the Bulldogs. And I just can't see, especially a team like Seattle sitting at 30, passing him up. He just fits everything that Seattle wants to do, whether they bring back Marshawn Lynch or not. It makes a lot of sense for them to take Gurley number 1 or with their first pick. You know, and a bunch of other teams could be interested in him too. He's a phenomenal running back talent. And you spoke to this class about how it's a tough year for running backs just because, once again, there are a bunch of running backs who had either very successful seasons or moderately disappointing seasons. You start off with Gurley, who had a great season, but it ended in disappointment because of the ACL tear. Melvin Gordon had a great first year as a full-time starter, who was really one of the elite running backs in the country. But me personally, I have my own, worries with Wisconsin running backs that they just come into the NFL with too much tread already on their tires. Yes, he's leaving early, which is the smart move for him, but we'll see how he translates. Then you have a Mike Davis, Tevin Coleman, T.J. Yeldon, and Duke Johnson out of Miami, who I'm surprised that there's so much hype around Duke Johnson, just being that, once again, despite all the success at Miami and being Miami's all-time leading rusher, smaller guy, more of a change of pace back that you kind of see these days in the NFL, a la Giovanni Bernard or someone in that kind of mold. But I really think it'll be interesting to see how Coleman, Yeldon, and Mike Davis do behind Gurley and, Melvin Gordon as the other running backs. I think the combine is really going to be big for those guys if they're going to get their stock into the second round or higher.
I completely agree with you. I think the Todd Gurley injury changes up the pick a little bit, just because Todd Gurley does go does go inside 10. Does Amir Abdullah come up and become a first-round potential? It's funny to think about it that way, but it'll be an interesting year to see. Because I think there's a lot of first, second, third round running back talent, and then I don't know where the running back talent ends. That goes from there.
Absolutely. It's going to be another interesting offseason here on the Roll Tide Draft Blog. So please check out all of our other videos and take a look at our big board here on the website. And also take a look out for our mock drafts that will be coming out. And as the Combine, NFL Draft, and Pro Days start to pop up here throughout the offseason, take a look at how we update all of these big boards and mock drafts. But I'm Baker Lehman for the Roll Tide Draft Blog. Thanks for watching, guys.